Welcome to episode four,
Yeah,
five of the Revenue Riders. Uh, we're here with Drew Noel and Jason Saltzman, and our special guest this week, Jeff Torbeck. Probably didn't pronounce that correctly, but Jeff is a lifelong athlete and a revenue leader, and one of the very few people on LinkedIn that has a bike emoji in his name. And that's how I found him, and that's why we're here today. So, with that, I think we'll jump into our normal flow of things, talk a little bit about our weekend, and then get into how Jeff thinks about the parallels between the business world and the world of endurance athletics.
awesome.
Drew, what'd you get up to this weekend?
Let's see. I had another big endurance weekend where I finally figured out um, the differential that I was experiencing between my training stress score and the actual rate of perceived exertion, or RPE, as we sometimes hear it called, for my endurance training. And my coach and I both figured that out actually in Training Peaks as well. And it was an interesting point that if you set the rate of perceived exertion to where you want it to be at, it ends up being in the middle of an interval, like, or in the middle of a power zone. But
Mm,
if you set your target based on your power zones, it actually like ends up pushing your training stress score to the top of the power zone.
mm.
So it's like, oh, well, your target it's unattainable really unless you're pushing into the zone above. So we finally figured that out, and I ended up doing 9 hours of riding total for the weekend with like 180 miles and all of that at like 220 watts.
Nice.
Yeah. So just
Getting the miles in, and I guess that's a good unlock on the fact that you're not going to be driving yourself crazy all winter.
no, it's just doing the work. So
Awesome, Jeff. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, following 180 miles is laughable with kids right now. A lot of holiday stuff with the kids, trunk or treats, things like that for there. But got out on Saturday, rode the bike, the mountain bike this time, not the road bike, so I could get out
nice.
early, and then ran on Sunday. So trying to mix it all up. I'm more the triathlete in this group, so it won't just be one discipline for 9 hours for me through the weekends.
Totally.
So try
That's
to mix
awesome.
it up so I can get shorter, 1, 2 hour, 3 hour things in there versus a 9 hour block.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Jason?
Went on my second run in 5 years on Friday afternoon and didn't hate myself on Saturday, which was fairly shocking. I mean, this is one where I somehow, I think in spending so much time riding, never really touched running for literally years. And went to Seattle 2 weekends ago to see some friends and didn't take a bike with me, which is an oddity for me. And we went out one morning and went on a run, and I thought, oh, that was actually pretty nice, and I didn't blow my knees out yet or kill my shins, and so went on another run Friday, and then got a good 8 hours worth of riding Saturday and Sunday. Sort of back into the swing of things post off season, such that still exists, right? Still need to take some time to deload, decompress.
Mhm.
Can't run it hot year round.
No, awesome. Well, cool. So, Jeff, let's get into it. I think in preparing for the episode, we talked about a number of different themes, but probably what's most interesting is the aspect of your viewpoint. I mean, as a triathlete, as a revenue leader, and also as a working dad, just the relationship of athletics to your work and also to your life overall, and kind of how those things have been in interaction, how they've interplayed, and really interested to hear kind of your overall perspective on that theme, which is central to the Revenue Riders podcast overall. So we'd love to kick it off there.
Yeah, I think it's, an interesting correlation, right? I think there's more correlation than people normally think. And like background on me is like I was a distance swimmer my whole life. I swam since I was 6 years old. My parents have like a picture of me in like a full arm cast, still racing, which back then is like, or now is like, why are people in the water with casts on? But we took more risks back then, I guess. Swam through college, got into marathoning. Once I got into marathoning, it was like that pulled me into triathlons, which pulled me into Ironman Lake Tahoe, which is like still like my biggest accomplishment athletic wise, I think, since then. So dying to get back to do some more soon now that the kids are getting a little bit older. But, as you said, as a dad, it takes the time out of there. But I think when you think about the importance of athletics and work is the first thing that comes to my mind is like discipline and organization and time management. And I think those can all be used pretty interchangeably, but all the athletes I know in my life, and then when we were going through school and all of us are in jobs and stuff now, like you didn't have free time. You didn't have time to just like figure out what to do. And so all these people that come from that background, like get it done when they need to get it done, right? When we hear all these things now of like, oh, you should be time blocking your day so that you're more effective. It's like, well, athletes have been doing that since the beginning of time. And so I think when you think about like the correlation of that between work, it's the exact same thing. It's just different, right? Because one's work and one is typically like an exercise or a hobby or something like that. And I think that's why athletes or people that I think push themselves outside of work to do things like riding 9 hours or going and swimming in the ocean or something like that, just handle stress and the work better because they just have another outlet. But more importantly, like when it's time to work, they get it done, right? I come from the very early school startup days of like first one in, last one out. It's like you had to be there for 12 hours and sit in an office to be seen. And it's like I think we're finding now that was detrimental to a lot of people, mental health wise and things like that. And I think now it's a focus on, can you be efficient when you need to be so that you also have time to have the dreaded word work-life balance, and is that possible as people go through it?
Yeah. I think, one thing that I have experienced is that one of the primary draws that I have to being an athlete is that it forces me to have a work-life balance, right? Because I know that, I love work. I love what I do. And I'm very grateful to be doing the work that I do. And I find it interesting and very fulfilling, but I have a tendency to over rotate into it. Right. And kind of it can very quickly become all consuming. So having almost like a balancing factor or something that pulls me away from the screen, away from the desk at the end of the day, or at a strategic time in the day, right? So that I can have a mental reset or to effectively draw my attention elsewhere, refresh myself so that I can go back and hit it hard again. It's funny because a lot of people who are involved in athletics and business were probably generally considered extra type A, right? Where it's like, oh, you're going like super hard, like work hard, play hard, it's like, really extreme. But I think in a way, like there is that ability to chill out and let your mind reset on the things that you're working on or pull away from and then re-engage with both, your work life and your athletic life. And I think, what have you seen in like your day-to-day and also in the people that have reported to you who are engaged as athletes, because we're going to talk about that a little bit too, is, what's sort of the primary lift that you see like as people engage in their offset, if you will?
Yeah, I think what you said was perfect in the set of like people will just work all day. But I think like there's tons of research out there that shows there's just a massive diminishing return if you just sit in front of a screen and do the same thing. Like people that have, writer's block or something like that, they typically do something else to change their mindset and then come back and try it again. It should be the same thing at work. So like to your point, Drew, around like a strategic time, maybe that's lunch. Like I have reps that go on lunch runs every day and they block their calendar from 12 to 1 or 11 to 12 or whatever they consider their lunchtime, because that allows them to have the energy, the focus, the mental clarity to finish the rest of the day. And I think that's the big thing is people just think, oh, if I work more hours straight through, that I'm going to do better because that's more hours that I've worked. But it's the quality of hours that you work. And so to your point, like having something else and like having training goals that pour you away that like, shit, I can't skip today or the next day to go for a run, to go for a ride, to go for a swim. Like that's going to actually help you in your work life. People just don't want to prioritize that necessarily because they feel like, oh, well, then people see that I'm not working, my Slack bubble's not green, whatever the heck it is. And like, it's all internal, I think. Same people like sit at their desk every day and have lunch instead of like sitting in the kitchen of their house or like a common room of an office or something like that. Like, I think those are things that people overlook because there's this mentality of like, we need to be working all the time. And I think that's actually worse for you in the long term.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right, it's the thing where, you might still be working, right, quote unquote, when you go out and you do the hard work of exercise, but it's a different type of work. And, I think for those of us that, have bought into it, or have been bitten by the bug, right, it's sort of a work that cuts through the noise of everything else and I think we talked about this when we were doing the setup for this episode, right? Oftentimes your best ideas come to you when you're in the middle of nowhere 3.5 hours into a ride or an hour into a run or whatever it might be. And you've given yourself that time to be away from just staring at the screen or just sitting in a meeting room, where you feel like you should be able to come up with the ideas. And when they'll come to you when they come, and giving yourself the space to do so and sort of the ability to cut through whatever low level chatter because you're focused on riding at Drew's 220 watts for 5 hours, right?
Weight adjusted, okay? Weight adjusted, 220 watts.
Got it.
It really does. It sort of it levels everything out, or at least that's what I've found, right? It gives you the space to really focus, or almost to not focus and have the focus come to you.
Yeah, I think it's just the clarity thing, right? Like people get clarity, right? And it's like not necessarily because you stop thinking about it, but it's just like exercise does the whole endorphin, dopamine thing, whatever you want to say. Same reason people are like all over cold plunges and things like that. Now, like whatever you do, awesome. But like I think we need to be doing things outside of just sitting in a desk all day, looking at the same thing over and over again. That's how we're gonna like really generate not only good mental health, but also like better ideas and more efficient workers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And when you couple that with the time blocking and the need to be efficient when you're actually behind the desk so that you have the time to go and exercise and, really create that space and create that clarity, you are more efficient when you're actually sat there doing the work, because you know that you only have limited hours, right? Whatever it is. It's not Murphy's Law. That's the one where everything goes wrong. But it's the other one where, everything takes as long as you allot it. Then all of a sudden, if you don't have quite that much time to dilly-dally and stare off at the Excel spreadsheet, you're going to sit there and really, put the hammer down when you're doing it.
And I know we all write on LinkedIn, and that means that we all doom scroll on LinkedIn to a certain degree too. So that's
Well, I think to your point too, Jason, like that's why kids in college cram for tests or cram for finals, like because they do have a set time of like, okay, we're out of time. I only have 3 hours to the final or the finals tomorrow. It's the same thing, right? Like somebody could work for 10 hours or somebody could work for 6 hours and they could do the same thing, because if the work is more structured and thoughtful, you don't need to work for 10 hours, right? You can and hopefully get more done, but I find very few people that can put their head down for 10 hours and get the work done, unless you're like Elon Musk or somebody like that. Like, I don't know how you do that well. And I think you need the breakups in the day, whether it's a lunch break, a walk, a run, like whatever it is, like just do something that gets you up and moving.
Yeah.
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 I mean, right, it's the same way we treat intervals when we're training, right? You know, to be able to do the hard work, the truly hard work, the deep work, whatever you want to call it, you have to have the space where you're backing off, recharging, refocusing, recentering, whatever word you want to throw at it, whatever word's true to you. And then you can really go at it when you are, you know, putting your foot down.
Yeah. I I think this is an interesting point. I want to throw a funny, challenge that I've been running into, and I think it relates to our next point, which is, getting into, managing athletes and hiring athletes, especially in revenue roles. Jeff, I think you have some interesting things to say about that. But I also want to call out that, like, sometimes for me, especially like if I go deep on a workout, like, I can't bring myself back, right? So it's like a funny thing of like, okay, well, doing that in the middle of the day for me doesn't really work. So I always like have a tendency to be like, okay, well, like, I'm gonna hit my desk super hard throughout the day. I'm gonna make sure like I at least take breaks so that I eat and I'm well fueled. And then, like, I go to do like my super intense workout like at the end of the day, and like my big endurance workouts on the weekend, and like I'm literally mentally useless after them a lot of the time. It's like I'm like, okay, totally fried, can't sit down and stare at a screen. It's like almost like that creates balance in itself and the space, because it's like, well, I'm not going to be effective anyway, right? So it's like I actually like that counterpoint of being like, okay, if you really going to that level, then like, yeah, you cannot go back to it, right? Now, of course, like, I think, themes of recovery and, of course, recharge, like we were talking about, that plays into it. But I'd love to hear like some of your thoughts and, your ideas around hiring for revenue roles from those who, have either athletic backgrounds or athletic interests, and how that correlates to their performance, but then also, how you see that interplay occur in terms of managing, especially maybe um, younger revenue pros, and how they maybe like, do well or not in terms of managing their work responsibilities with their outside interests.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. I think
Sure.
the first one is self-awareness is key when it comes to it. Like you said, like if you go do a big ride in the middle of the day, like, first of all, you're probably not going to find 3 hours in the middle of the day that you can do that. You're not very good coming back on it. And I think some people, like, I'm a morning workout person because it like gets me woken up and I just do great work in the morning. To be fair, I can't be a night workout person because I have kids, and by the time I put them to bed, I'm exhausted anyway, and I think I would just be up all night. So I think the first thing is like self-awareness of what works for you as you go through there. If you are somebody that can't come back after it, then yeah, the end of the day probably makes the most sense for you. But some people do it because it just gives them the energy that they need to, instead of 12 cups of coffee in the afternoon or a 5-hour energy or something like that. In terms of the hiring landscape, I don't think I'm in the minority when I say, like, I always look for athletic people. People that came from athletics, that was either a college athlete, something that they're still doing today. I kind of look at it as, I kind of bucket those folks in the same as people that have like a side hustle or another business or something like that as well, because you have so many things going on. Like, it's the idea of, like, if you're busy enough, like, you have to do certain things at certain times. And I just find those people to be much more organized, much more focused, typically more open to feedback. You were talking about your coach at the beginning, or when we were prepping for this, about how you guys are like working on watts and things like that. It's like, so you have somebody you have to work with. Like, I just think they're more coachable, they're more encourageable. And then when you talk about like motivating them, you can typically figure out ways pretty quickly of how to motivate salespeople. Early days when I was at Salesforce 15 years ago or whatever it was now, like, the motivation was just spiffs, like $500 here and there, and people would go crazy over that stuff. Like, oh my God, they'd work all night for $500 or whatever it was. Now that doesn't have the same effect. Now people want time off or to leave early or more flexibility or some kind of like experience, like a trip or a contest. And it's like, but how do you motivate them long enough to it? And people that typically have something that they're training for understand that like it doesn't, you just don't wake up and go do a 100-mile ride. Like you're probably training, especially if you're coming from couch to nothing, you're training a lot to do it. Right. And so that's my mentality when I look at, you know, hiring athletes or somebody that's doing something like that outside of work. I just find that if all you have is work, that's all you're going to do. And I think people burn themselves out really quickly. Right. And it doesn't have to go back to like, they need to go ride 100 miles. They need to go do an Ironman. They need to run a marathon every weekend. But like, if you're not taking care of yourself outside of work, it makes me question whether you bring your full self or the endurance to get through the good and the bad days as they stack up on each other.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, this goes back to, I think we talked about this a little bit with Lucas on his, during his episode where, he's working with the Uru team now as an advisor, and their whole model is to bring former athletes, into the corporate world and really present them with those opportunities. We know that they make good employees. We know sort of why and how they make good employees, and it's just connecting the people with the opportunity there.
I want to double down on the corollary to side hustle, because I think that's, not everybody's an athlete, right? And I think this is an interesting thing in terms of, this being a business podcast as well as an athletic podcast. It's so important to know like that really athletics is a side hustle for so many of us, right? Yep. When you're spending anywhere from like minimum 10 hours a week, if you're serious about it, to like 30 hours a week outside of work, if you're super serious about it, that it's like, just balancing all of that stuff is so intense. And I think, to your point as well, Jeff, like in terms of raising a family and the commitment to that, I think it's really cool when I see professionals who highlight, that they're a dad, or like they put that in their description, or like they highlight the fact that, they're like hyper committed to a specific purpose or like social endeavor, right? Because it really does show like, yes, this is how I create space. And, to Maud's point last week, Jay said it was so interesting when she was like saying like, look, you share this openly with people and it creates a bit more of that boundary so that you actually can perform at a higher level in your professional life as well as in that side hustle, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And it gives everyone else sort of it sets an example, right? So that everyone else can pursue whatever their version of their outside of the office ambition is, right? I think that's really what we're talking about is, okay, who are these driven people and what are they working on in the various domains of their life, whether that's, what the three of us are partial to, and probably at this point, everyone who listens to this is partial to, being athletics, or if it's, the charity that you're involved with, or the choir that you coach or support, whatever it is, if you're really pouring a lot of effort into something beyond the four walls of the corporate world, you have that thing that you're spending time on, and it, it's not something I understand outside of athletics particularly. I don't have time to understand it outside of athletics, but it's, what allows everyone else to figure out, okay, this is my grounding thing. This is the thing that gives me the clarity and the time management and the dedication and all of these other things that we've highlighted, over the course of this conversation.
And I think to even simplify that a little bit more, it's like whether you want to make it athletics or a side hustle or a charity or something, like from a company standpoint, executives want people that are going to be committed to the organization for a long time, right? and we see all the things in sales where like it's like 2.1 years is the average. It's going up, it's going down. I think with remote work it'll go up because people have more flexibility, they'll be happier long term. But I look at it as, if you can be committed to something for so long, whether it's doing the charities, whether it's doing a ride, like continually doing races year after year, or whatever like that is, if we build a good situation for you here at a business, why would you leave? And why wouldn't you give the same commitment level as that? And it's like, I think that's a huge part that people overlook, because as a leader, or as you're planning for growth, and then a lot of these like higher level leaders too are looking not at growth this year, but like 12 months, 18 months, 36 months down the road. If you know you can keep most of your team together for that 36 months or whatever, that changes the way you plan, right? It keeps the cohesiveness together. I would say, I would put it the same way as like team rides, you ride a lot faster than you ride by yourself, right? I know there's like wind resistance and coefficients, and like
Yeah.
let's skip those. Let's be in a vacuum for a little bit. But like you're just going to push yourself harder with people. So it's like, if you're surrounded by people that you like and everybody's committed to the same thing because you came to this organization because you are purpose driven, or you do like the product, or you do like the people, like that all correlates, right? And you're finding these driven people, like you said, Jason, and pushing them towards the same cause. And as long as like the same cause is what they can really get behind, then it's just a recipe to success every single time.
Yeah, and it's hard as hell to retain people. I mean, this is the data I live in every day. You look at it, and 41% of people who change jobs do so within the first year. 77% of people do so within the first 3 years, right? So when you talk about the 36 months, right, it's not even the 36 months to have half of your team go out the door if they're not really tied to something greater than the fact that they're typing away in a doc or writing code or whatever it might be. It's what really keeps them around, and how do you retain them? How do you get the most out of them? How do you really make it beneficial for everyone involved, as much as possible?
I want to dig into something on this. Like it just sparked the correlation between that and training as like an ongoing activity, and the expansion of that from like lower levels of engagement in sport to kind of maintaining interest and expanding your potential, practice or expansion of skill level, etc. And I mean, Jeff, like, as we've talked about, I mean, you've done Ironman Lake Tahoe, and that race is gnarly. And I think, for people who don't know, I think you should tell them what that means. And then kind of talk about your journey to get there, and kind of like how that progression occurred, and maybe what were some of the things that built up that game, right? Because I think this correlates to career progression internally, and also retention is maintaining an interesting game for the progression of the individual, right? And making it worthwhile, right? Incentivization is so interesting because some people are really into it, and then you have like the old, I would say in the bike racing community, like the refrain of like, oh, well, I quit racing because I realized I was just doing it for like $50 and a t-shirt. And you're like, well, that's not why you were doing it, dude. Like,
Yeah.
So interested to hear, the description of that, and also like your ideas around the progression there, because I think that's a clear theme in your career as a revenue leader, and also as an athlete. I'm super interested to dig into that.
Yeah, I think the progression is very similar. Like you said it out, like coaching or things like that are doing similar things, or how you're developing and how you're continuing to do it. Like the triathlon, the Ironman journey for me, like I said, I was a swimmer. It went into marathon running. Somebody said, well, you know how to swim and you know how to, be a marathoner. Like, why don't you go ride? I'm like, well, I've never owned a road bike in my life, but I know how to mountain bike. I'll figure it out. And so we did that. But it's like, when I took on that journey, it was like, okay, to your point, like an Ironman is a 2.4 mile swim, typically in some open body of water. For this one, it was Lake Tahoe. Then it's a 112-mile bike, and then you run a marathon. And you have to do this all within 17 hours, or they cut you off and you can't finish. Like, it's not just go till you finish. It's like within a timeline. And so you have to learn all these things. And like the correlation to work is like, it's not just like you have to know how to swim, you have to know how to bike, you know, have to run, you have to have enough training. But like, what's overtraining versus undertraining? How does nutrition play into that? Because they always say you can't out-train nutrition. Like if you have a bad day of nutrition, it doesn't matter what kind of good shape you're in. Um, but for me, the journey was simple. Like find a team that has the knowledge, and then how do I continue to grow through there, right? Coaches, mentors. How do I have a good organization and a good team that I want to continue to show up with? Because like training days for that were 8+ hours every day on the weekend, and I was working out twice a week during the week. I would bus into the YMCA in San Francisco. I'd swim in the morning, go to work at Salesforce, then leave and run, Golden Gate Park or something in the afternoon. And then we'd have a track workout in the middle of the week. And then we'd typically do our riding during the weekends and stuff like that. But it's like, it's this consistency, but it goes back to like the end goal where like that falls into the work world exactly, right? Like you start an organization, they give you a quota for the year. You don't go, great, hopefully I get there by December 31st or whatever your year end is. It's like you have to plan it, right? You break it into quarters. You have to figure out how you're doing it. You have to look back and say like, okay, I had a great quarter or I didn't. What do I change next quarter, right? And if it's a great quarter, okay, those things went well. Did I get lucky in a couple places, or did I really do a good job X, Y, and Z? And can I do that again, right? I think that's how the correlation comes very, very quickly. But I think it goes back to something we said a lot earlier was athletes are people that have goals and have set goals to whether it's run their first marathon, run their first half marathon, run their first 5K even. Like they set a goal and it took them amount of time. Those people are the most coachable, right? Those people can take negative feedback, not as a dig to them, but as a, okay, interesting. More importantly, what I find is those are people that can also self-identify their weaknesses and work with their leaders to say like, hey, I don't think I'm doing well here and here. Does that matter? Or is that what's really holding me back from getting to where I want to get to? Right? Yeah. Just like the same thing when it comes to like doing an Ironman or something like that. Like I'm a very strong swimmer. I'm a pretty decent runner. I would say I'm like an okay biker compared to some of my friends and people that I trained with. But it's like I could give up a lot of time on the bike because I'm going to crush them on the swim and I can outrun them. And so it's the same thing. Like you don't have to be good at it all. And I think that relates really well to work. But if you surround yourself with people that can help you all the way along the way, that just ultimately leads to success.
Yeah, the T-shaped aspect of it, and it's funny because I've been talking to I'm actually interviewing Mark Staus, who's the CEO of Proof Analytics at Mopsapalooza coming up, and we're talking about the T-shaped approach in revenue operations, and it's so interesting because as an athlete, right, cross training in itself is being T-shaped, right? You're not necessarily going to be great at everything that you try, but if you try other things, right, or you at least understand or be open to the perspective of other athletes, you're going to learn, what could be potentially applied to your own discipline or how to improve your approach to your own discipline. And I think it's a pure corollary there as well.
Yeah, and I think I want to go back to the thing that Jeff said is, on being not self-critical, but, very aware of where you can improve, right? If you're racing or performing at a high level and you get beat, you want to know why. You want to know how to improve it. You want to figure out what the way to not have that happen again is. And, whether that's done with a team, right, with a coach, with a nutritionist, with a sports psychologist, or with a business, the business corollary, with the rest of your revenue team, with the rest of your executive team, with all the people that are there to support you and help you succeed, right? Because your success is their success and their success is your success, right? Sort of it constantly feeds upon itself and it allows you to really get better. And, it is that self-critical, hyper-aware nature that, I think a lot is another one of the things that athletes bring to the business world.
Yeah, you just made me think of something too. Is like you said, like you're playing the team aspect a lot, right? And I think the thing athletes and people that train as a team or have trained for something with a team understand is like it is a team sport, right? Even if it's an individual race, and revenue is a team sport, right? And it's like some people are going to have bad quarters, bad years, whatever it is. But if it's just like, oh, somebody else will make it up, no big deal, that's a problem, right? And that's why teams start to present each other. That's why people leave companies. That's why good people leave good companies. Same thing with leaders, right? If like leaders are missing their goals, but reps are hitting, then it just becomes this like bad relationship. And that's a leader's problem, not an IC's problem, to be honest. But I think get this more team aspect. Like a couple of the teams that I've built recently, like they're constantly reaching out to each other. Like, how can we help? Can I jump on some calls with you? Like, I see you're behind. Like, we still have this much left in the quarter. Like, what's out there? Like, how can I help? And that's like, that's not me asking them to go do it. It's like we've built such a good team culture that like winning's fun, but you know what's even more fun? Winning when everybody's winning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're the only person hitting quota on your team, that's great. You're making good money, but like you're probably not going to stick around that long because either A, you're going to be asked to do too much, or there's just going to be so much negativity from everybody else you're working with because they're going to say like you're getting the best leads or you're somehow getting something, and it wears on you. You know, it might take a month, it might take 2 years, but like that's just not a long-term strategy that's going to be successful.
No. No, it is interesting, like the points that feed that overall activity as well, and making sure that I mean maybe this is a point that I've been thinking about recently is like clearly communicating. I mean, this is why, there's 50 books every single year on like strategy in business, right? And it's like, yeah, like let's make sure that we have goals and that the goals are communicated clearly to everybody within the organization, and like that's your strategy. It's like, yeah, but actually making sure that the alignment of all of the subsections or targets or quotas and incentives that go along with all of that are aligned to those goals. And it's funny because sometimes people are like, oh, well, you're getting down into the weeds there. It's like, well, but that's where the secret sauce lies. And I think that, the rubber really meets the road when you get into structured operational execution. And again, that goes all the way back to like, what we were initially talking about around time blocking and just being organized in terms of your plan and your schedule and that day in, day out ability to hit, those basic targets. Like, okay, good. Like my cold calls, like if you're doing them, right? LinkedIn posting, if that's where your ICP is, like, the approach of like just sending out the communications at a personalized level, taking that time and that care to do that, on an outbound approach, right? Or on an inbound approach, like really making sure your messaging is figured out so that you can actually communicate at a mass level to your market. How do you differentiate, like figuring out your differentiation or like your positioning strategy so that you aren't just like, yeah, we're just like that other thing, and it's like, well, like, I mean, Jason, I mean, you have a challenge in that like all the time with, you sell a data product and it's like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of other data products out there, but how are you actually different? And I think that figuring out these details is something that the day-to-day execution of an athlete correlates very strongly to as well. Is that it's like, look, you just have to do the thing. And it's like, people are like, oh, don't bore me with the details. You're like,
Life is in the details.
It's in the details. Like,
yeah. You don't just wing it.
Even the big picture is made up of a bunch of smaller details.
That's right.
Right? It's no matter how you want to slice it, right? You can walk outside and look and think, oh, the big picture is that the sun is out and it's a blue sky day. But if you want to, as nerdy as you care to get about what made it a blue sky day today, you can. right?
Yeah.
Or, and if you want to pause and just look at it and say, okay, for right now, I'm happy it's a blue sky day. Great. You can leave it there, but the option to really get granular and understand why, and maybe that's a bad one. No one can control the weather, but for the things that we're all, that people are constantly working towards.
Yeah.
If you can look at the output, the end goal, and understand that you can work towards it, and what all of the different components on making it more repeatable to get where you want are.
Yeah.
Well, and nobody wants to be managed just on metrics, right? Like, ask any salesperson, like, they don't want to just go in and say, like, you have to make 100 calls a day, you have to send 100 emails, and you just have to do it, right? But there is a formula that works for you. You might be really good on the phones. You might be really good on the email. You might be really good at LinkedIn messages. Shit, maybe you just meet people at networking events, or you go to conferences and you just kick ass because you're just this amazing personality in person. Like, you need to understand your metrics, and you need to understand what works for you. Just like your two are both big cyclists, but your training programs are probably different. But you could still get to the same success or to the same goal. And yeah,
I won't be
there's
getting
other ways to do
Jason's
it.
success in cycling.
Yeah.
but I will pursue like the equivalent, right, within my own sphere. But you're you're totally right on that point, Jeff. I actually want to take that blue sky point and bridge into our final topic of discussion, which is really around taking advantage of that space and really facilitating or encouraging that space from a release from work, or the ability to balance work and life, if again, if that's a thing, and also the mental health aspects of it. So Jeff, I think you have some really interesting ideas to share around that, and would love to hear from you on those points.
Yeah, I just think people need to get away from the screens, right? You've heard all the things of like go for a walk, I think one of the things I've adopted in the past is like walk and talks, where like we've actually had people like different departments go on a walk and talk to each other and things like that. And like not a Zoom call, like in a phone call. I know it's weird, you can't see people's face, but like you're outside, you're doing all that kind of stuff. Like maybe you hear sounds in the background and talk about where you live and things like that. But the point is to just get away from it, because I think we just sit here all day, right? I've had plenty of times, and the way I look at leadership and the way that I run my teams is like, you can, if you know your team really well, like when somebody's having a bad day, or like somebody calls you and they're like, hey, like I know it's like 3:00, like here's what I need to do, I'm way behind on stuff like that, and you can just hear that they're like scatterbrained and like, okay, the next 2 or 3 hours of work, till even if you work till 6 or 7 or something, like you're not going to accomplish anything. Like my strategy is always like, call it a day, go do something that's going to reset you, whether it's going to the gym, whether it's running, whether it's going and having a drink or dinner with a buddy. Like fine, go do something other than work, because this obviously has you like totally flustered, and then come back. And typically what happens is people come back stronger the next day, and they'll make up for an hour early or whatever they did the day before. But I think more importantly, you've got to give this space for people to be like, I just don't have it today, right? Like maybe they have kids, maybe loved ones are sick, or, COVID was a very big part of this. Like a lot of people couldn't see their parents, kind of that kind of stuff. And it was just like, just keep working. That's how you keep your mind off of it. And the reality is that's not true. Like you need to give people the space, but more importantly, is it important for them to go do it? It's important to give them the space to be like, hey, I need a day, or I need half a day, or I need the next hour, or like, I know we have a team meeting in an hour, but like, I'm just not going to be present. Like it just won't be a good one. Cool. Let's sync up tomorrow morning with what you caught up. And I think there's a lot of leaders out there that are scared to do that, because there's enough people that would take the rope and take too much of the rope, and really kind of like exert it. But it goes back to the whole like unlimited PTO thing. Like that's a scam in most situations, because most people don't use all their PTO, right? There are some people that are super smart and they use a ton of it, and that's great. But it was really designed so that organizations didn't have to then pay people for days they didn't use. But it was supposed, the way they position it, right, is to encourage you can take time off whenever. But anybody in an unlimited PTO knows there's like a little bit more like hierarchy steps that have to do that. And so it has to come to the leader to be like, this is what we want, and we want to encourage people to be present and be mentally there all the time, and understand that there are going to be hard days. And if there are, like, let them go do what they need to do. And that's a bevy of things. That could literally just be laying outside and staring up at the sky. Like, fine. If that's what like resets you, great. It's like going to play with your dog, great. If it's driving around, awesome. Just go do something so that you can come back and actually contribute the way that you know you can. Because you just can't, when you're mentally blocked, like, you can't just push through it. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I think especially allowing direct reports to effectively like bug out when they have to, right? And it really becomes a greater multiplier on the back end, and just letting people have the space. I will be very honest, like, I see a lot of like, and I think this is relevant, but I'll contrast it with, there's, you see like the posts sometimes on Fridays where it's like, champions create distance on Fridays, and much love to Tom Alamo, because like he uses that a lot, and like I think he's great, but like at the same time I'm like, yeah, well, the way I create distance on Friday sometimes is I just leave at like 3:00.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
you create distance a different way.
Yeah,
you distance yourself from work that you can come back. Exactly.
So, but it also like is just really about finding that balance. I mean, there's also like those days, like usually like my Tuesdays and Wednesdays are like 10 to 12 hour days. And it's like, I mean, again, that works for me. Like, so finding out what works, doing that, and how you exchange it, also being transparent about that. I think it's like, you don't have to like be concerned about it as long as you're able to deliver and be effective in the end.
Like, well, understanding where you're effective, right? Like, I'm a morning person. I know that's where I do my best thinking and stuff like that. Like, I've had people that work with me that are like, hey, can I start at 10? Because I'm going to work till 6:30 or 7. I'm like,
sure.
Because they do their best at that time. I'm like, well, good for you. I'm terrible at 6 p.m. So, good for you. But to your point, like, that's the way we work today, especially in the SaaS world. Like, it doesn't really matter when you work to me, as long as you're actually getting the work done.
Yeah. Right.
And if you can get it done in 4 hours, great. But I always challenge people, like, if you can get it done in 4 hours, can you be that effective for 8 hours? You should like think about how great you could be then, right? So it's not just like this like hack to like work less. No. It's about just take the work time and actually be as efficient as possible, and then go take care of yourself outside of it. And the people that show up to work the best are the people that are also the happiest outside of work.
100%. Yeah.
Right.
Jeff. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Of course.
It's really cool. Awesome. Like, and again, like, full support on just all the concepts that we've hit on today. Loved the pregame, loved meeting you, and like just getting your perspective on all of this. Super cool.
Yeah, hope we stay in touch with all this stuff. This is good. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thanks for making it easy to find you. Putting the emoji in your.
Of course. Yeah. Now I'm going to see what other emojis I can put in there to see who reaches out to me. Like, now This is like this can be a game to see how this works.
It's awesome. Actually, lead RevOps analyst at Gartner has a bike emoji in his name as well.
He's next.
So,
he's next. We're going to take all the bikers first. I like it.
Awesome. Very cool. Again, thanks to our audience for listening. Myself, Drew Noel, Jason Saltzman, working at SCS Cloud and Live Data Technologies, are official, unofficial sponsors, as I like to call them. And thanks everybody for listening. Jeff, thanks again for the time. And Revenue Riders, out.
See you guys.